Hello, freedom loving people, and welcome to another episode of the Restricted Handling Podcast, where we break down everything international security, geopolitics. I'm usually joined by Glenn Korn, longtime CIA officer and legend. He is traveling in Eastern Europe right now, as he does occasionally. And fortunately, we have Mike Pako Benitez with us, who some of you who have followed Combat Story will recall a deep dive interview on Mike's background, his experience in the cockpit. He was an F-15E Weapon Systems Officer, fighter weapons school grad. I think you guys still need to get that at parity with Top Gun. Just watch Top Gun 2. It's shameful you don't have the same
Man,
recognition, I think, globally. We'll talk about that in a sec. DFC recipient, Distinguished Flying Cross. Amazing work that you've done. You know weapons inside and out from the military aviation standpoint. And then since retiring, you founded the Merge newsletter, which I think when we did an interview, maybe 18 months, 2 years ago, had maybe 8 to 10,000 followers. I think you've got 60,000 plus now. This is a deep dive, like for insiders for military aviation technology, and people love it. I also received this, and we'll check in the spent rounds. Folks who like restricted handling will love the Merge. Mike, can you catch us up what you're doing now and a little deeper on the Merge before we jump in?
yeah, sure thing. So right now, this is actually timely. I am the CEO of a drone startup called Purple Rhombus, and I'm happy to talk through that.
Yeah.
Before that, I spent 4 years at Shield AI, which is a venture-backed startup doing drones, autonomy, and AI. And then before that, actually, it's one of these things I didn't reveal until just recently. So as we're recording this, it's probably been out publicly for now maybe a couple weeks. There was a company called Blue Force Technologies about 10 years ago that started on this path, yada, yada, yada. They built the drone that Anduril bought, the Fury. I actually helped them design and develop that about 10 years ago. So I was kind of in the drone space for a while, under the radar. And I did all that after I retired. Like you said, I spent 25 years on active duty, 17 in the Air Force as an officer, 8 in the Marine Corps enlisted. And so I've got a interesting, eclectic set of experiences that I try to bring to everything we're trying to do. And I'm really, really passionate about national security.
That's why I wanted you on the show. Can you go just a bit deeper on the Merge for people who haven't seen it yet? And I'm sure a lot of people will want to sign up after they hear about it.
Sure thing. So it's a newsletter, comes out Sunday and Tuesday. And I like to say it's an interesting blend of humor. I try not to take it too seriously. It's just edgy enough to be a little spicy sometimes. But I like to say we like to make sense of defense in an enjoyable way. It's a very serious business. I don't make light of that, but we don't want to take ourselves too seriously in the process.
There you go. Couldn't think of a better person to have on, Mike. I reached out just because of your background with all things kind of military aviation technology. Did not know about this latest venture to the drone sphere. We often end up talking about Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, talked Western Hemisphere, so much to cover. But we've had two folks on, frontline Ukrainian commanders for both UGV and UAV perspectives who are just on the front line iterating. But I just thought it would be great to get somebody's perspective who's lived it on the US side and is seeing this now from our side and all the wars that we fought, all the battles we fought, and what it looks like now. So thank you for joining us. I guess the first question is really just around where you see the US position when it comes to drones. We've heard that maybe we're falling a little bit behind. So much iteration happening on the front lines. We're there, of course, but maybe we don't have the same necessity as we once did. What's it look like from your perspective and the people you talk to?
Yeah, I think before I could share that, let me just share a little bit of what led to my perspective. Okay, I'm a big fan of if you're in the profession of arms, it's a profession, it's not a hobby, and so you want to study the game, and history is a big part of that game. So I want to read you this report, kind of an overview, and I want you to guess the year. Okay, so putting you on the spot for a second.
All
All
right.
right. So it's a report from the Conflict Armament Research Center. And the report basically said that they had gone to the site and found that these people were building drones homemade using wood and styrofoam, along with flight electronics that they've cracked open from different things, including camera controllers and some gyroscopes from phones. The electronics included components from Korea, Japan, and Turkey. And interestingly, in these sites that they were looking at, they started to find these dismantled Soviet SA-7s with the warheads removed that looked like they were starting to putting them onto these drones. So the question is, what year was this?
And with cameras, gyros, and then mentioning Soviet Union, maybe 2008, 2007, 2008, 2009.
16, 20, this was the
Damn it.
Islamic State. This was the ISIS compounds when we
Oh,
were going
interesting.
there. Yeah, so ISR drones using commercial off-the-shelf technology started with ISIS in 2014 in Iraq and Syria, but by 2016, they had already started building their own drones out of just what was available, right? And they started using the warheads out of the SA-7s and MANPADS to start flying these one-way attacks. So, the things that are happening in Ukraine and what ended up happening, like it really did start years before that. And that's not to say like causation is correlation and that then they adopted those lessons learned, but you can just see how technology, there's this interesting thing where like a breakthrough somewhere ends up becoming a breakthrough everywhere of how people just start to figure things out over time. And so I'm not saying that ISIS planted the scenes for what happened in Ukraine, but you have the 2014 to 2016 with ISIS, and then in 2020 you had what happened with the Armenian conflict, which was the first time that an offensive campaign was waged, coordinating maneuver with fires that's fixed, indirect fires, artillery, with drones for spotting, with drones with EFPs going after armor, just decimated the Armenian armor brigade, right? And that conflict lasted, 40 days, 45 days.
Jeez.
And then just like, 18 to 20 months later, Russia invaded Ukraine or reinvaded Ukraine, I guess, better way to say it. And now here we are 4 years into that campaign. And so I don't want to take anything away from what your previous guests had about, they're living it in Ukraine, but a lot of the things that have happened in Ukraine, if you go through the different chapters of, and now that we're hitting about the 4 year mark, in the beginning, Russia didn't actually go after the real strategic targets because they thought Ukraine was going to capitulate. And what
Yeah.
a huge strategic mistake that was. Because, like, why would I bomb the factory if I got to rebuild it next week, right? Well, why would I
Yep.
take out the power plant if I got to rebuild it next week? And so their choice to not go after, so they actually waged their own restricted war, led to this ability for Ukraine to defend itself. And then the drone revolution, I would argue, it happened out of necessity because they didn't have the
Exactly.
traditional equipment that you would think that you would organize, train, and equip like a Western force would, right? And so they're just doing what they have with what they have. And man, like, I can't say enough about their will to fight. And yeah, I can't say enough about it. But I will say, like, they wouldn't be in the situation if they had the right equipment to really repel the invaders.
So true. So true. I mean, we see it like constantly in the cat and mouse game. And I think it's just the necessity that's driving that innovation. And that's why I was curious. So you're taking like, where's the US now? How close are
Yeah.
we to parity there? And none of this is to disparage the US at all. It's just like when you're fighting in the war, I think you iterate so much faster. I don't know if we've had that type of conflict that they're going through.
Yeah, I think that's for a few reasons. To your point, the iterations, the battlefield adaptions and iterations are something like in a 2 to 4 week cycle right now. And if you just go like, well, 2 to 4 week cycle, that's like 12 to 20 something times a year. We're 4 years. We're in the
Yeah.
80th to 100th iteration of tactical like battlefield adaption. Like it's incredible to see play out. Unfortunately, we're all watching it play out.
Yeah.
But I say it's out of necessity because you've lost the ability to maneuver, and now you've kind of settled into this attrition warfare. You're just trying to, you're trying to inflict pain and have resilience. But to the point, the U.S. we haven't really been forced into a position of war necessity, right? Ukraine is fighting a war necessity, which is like that's really the engine that's fueling the battlefield adaptation and innovation that you see. I would argue, and there's lots of people out there that could talk better than me about it, of wars of choice versus wars of necessity. And so when you get into like the U.S., most of our stuff we've been involved in are war ends up being wars of choice when you look at it over time, right? And so Iraq, Afghanistan, great example. We brought at the peak 130,000 people in Afghanistan, and based on our plan, we gave up all of the high ground. We put all of our bases in the low territory to get attacked every day because that's where the population was going to be. We wanted to be with the population, and so uh, yeah, the strategy has a lot to do with the technology, and you have to keep those like intrinsically linked. So I think because the U.S. and we could war game stuff, on and on and on. the China, for instance, China, the war games with China going back 15 years, like they're all pretty doom and gloom, but no one really did anything about it. They're like, well, here's another war game that says it's not going to end well. And what I think is different now is we have the freedom culturally. I think the war in Ukraine has done a lot to change the mentality of the Americans, and the fact that like we have the ability to be creative and innovative and disruptive. We can disrupt ourselves with things. We don't, there's the organized train and equip. And so I'm going to give you these weapon systems that are going to last for 40 years and all the training and sustainment. Like, or we can just get better stuff every 2 or 3 years and not sustain them. And so there was talk about that for a while. I think now that from the drone aspects, the drone dominance program or drone dominance initiative that's now come out from the Pentagon. Huge first step. They're trying to onshore, reshore a Group 1 or quad rotor type drone supply chains back into the US. And so they're trying to create this demand signal to get the US back to where it used to be, which is like get yourself off the Chinese supply chains and even things like magnets, controllers, batteries, that kinds of stuff. I think it's going to expand into bigger and bigger drones, and the cost. One of the things that's really not something that's been a forethought in American Department of Defense acquisitions, programs, whatever you want to call it. Two things: cost and scale. Those things are generally an afterthought. And for those who don't understand or live in the defense industry in the United States, most historically, and there are exceptions we can talk through, most big programs are won off of PowerPoints and paper airplanes. So you write a really good proposal and you have some concept art of a thing that could be. If someone gave you a lot of money, you can go figure out how to build it, right? So it's a concept car, kind of car show competition. You go to a car show and you see these amazing concept cars. Turns out, have you ever seen a concept car and a production vehicle that look the same? No, no, right? Never. So you're winning these car shows and these prototype things, and then you got to figure out how to build it once you've convinced the Pentagon to give you the money and the contract. And that has led to these weird inefficiencies. And which gets back to a little bit of what I'm doing now is, what if you had a company and an effort and you could design from like first principles, which is like cost and scale. If those were what you aligned everything on, instead of, what is the radar cross section, or does it go zero point 0.8 Mach or 0.82 Mach? And there's certain things that do matter, to be clear, with some kind of performance attributes. But if you can complement that ecosystem with another ecosystem it's called DFM, design for manufacture. I want to build stuff at industrial scale that's radically affordable, and I want to use that to augment the current efforts in industrial base. And so right now, I think 2026 is going to be the inflection point of production for sure. Is like, how do we bring all of these things to bear? And it's really, really important. And this is why I'm doing what I'm doing now. I believe it's incredibly important to field a number of attritable and expendable systems with the American Armed Forces now, like 2026. It's got to happen, because you cannot deter an adversary unless you have credibility. And that means that you have to have capability and capacity, which means you have to have a force. You can't have, a golden shovel in the ground. In 2 years, there'll be a factory here, I promise. And then we'll put equipment in it, and then we'll hire people in it. And 5 years from now, we'll start building stuff. Like, we don't have that kind of time. I'm saying that does need to exist. It needs to happen, but it's not an either or. It's an and. And so right now, one of the big trends I see is the Pentagon is getting serious about creating clear demand signals about production at scale, whether it's tripling or quadrupling production lines that exist that the primes have. And so they're giving them these unprecedented, but finally multi-year contracts. Imagine, Brian, you might know this, but for all the viewers out there, imagine if you won a program of record, so that you have this weapon system. The only people in the world to make it is you, and you want to be able to negotiate your suppliers and contracts and have these long-term stability with supply chains and all that. The Pentagon can only give you money every 12 months, and they can't commit to anything more than 12 months ahead of time. Like, all of your incentives are just out of whack, right? So Congress had passed some authorities for multi-year weapons procurement, so you can actually do long-term production contracts, which would give them the incentives to get better deals for supply chains, scale up our production lines, make those kinds of investments. But then for another 3 or 4 years, nothing happened. And so just this year, finally, one of the biggest announcements that came out was Lockheed Martin has a couple of big contracts, like 7-year contract like incredible demand signal. It's like now we can actually get the stability that we need. There was another one that just came out before we recorded, the THAAD missile interceptors, those really, really expensive ones to do the endo exo atmospheric stuff for quadruple, 4x production rate contract. So like they are getting serious about production on the current existing lines, but I think they're also going to get serious on production of new things, low cost cruise missiles, one way attack drones, and things like that.
Do you see the US as competitive against China and Russia at this point in time when it comes to drone warfare?
As we're recording this in February of 2026, no. In February 2027, I hope to have a different answer. And that's where I think the United States, we were just like World War II, World War I, we were very, very slow to get started. But once we get up to steam, there's no stopping us. But we need that commitment and that sense of urgency and not just, talk, talk minus action equals zero. You need focus and you need follow through. And I think the things that we see coming out of the Pentagon right now, maybe a little too early to tell. We'll see, but I have pretty high confidence and faith that we're going to follow through. And I think in 2027 is going to be the year that we have credibility through deterrence and mass. So mass is going to be the key word.
Most of that supply chain going to be allied, or are they really trying to onshore almost all of it? I would assume you
Well,
can't do all of it. Rare earths, some.
yeah, there's some interesting like second, third tier supply things that get really interesting. Like when you get down to like motors, even though motors and batteries get built in the US and even in the allies are the same way. Ukraine is completely dependent on China as well. Once you start taking apart those motors, you go, well, that type of magnet, because it's a brushless motor, uses a special type of material in the magnet. Well, where does that material from the magnet come from? And so you're like, man, who actually dug the rock out of the cave? And it's like, oh, it's in China. Like, yeah, it sucks. Or I've taken this LiPo battery pack that says, made in the USA. Once you take it apart, where do those individual cells that have the lithium come from? It's like, well, that comes from somewhere in Singapore. Okay, well, where does the Singapore people get the lithium from to build those little cells to sell you? It's like, oh, well, that comes from China. Like, okay. So when you start going back at like a lot of things, a lot of roads lead to China. So there are some really, really good things happening. And I don't want, again, not to take away from things that great people doing great things to fix that. But I think Ukraine really is starting to lead the way in that. Now, drone dominance from the US is really, really important. It's going to have a really good demand signal. But not if, when Ukraine opens their restrictions to export their material, their technology that they've been building for 4 years at war, I think you're going to see an amazing shift in the US industrial
Interesting.
base. I think you're going to see strategic partners where Ukrainian companies to access the US market are going to sign partnerships with US small companies. And you're going to see these joint ventures and reseller relationships and things to get number one, it gets all that great Ukrainian tech that's been developed and battle tested, and it's also economically really really good price wise. So great performance, great price. By us being able to provide a venue for them to sell it, that money is going into Ukraine to help them rebuild, to give them an economy. So I think the wall coming down for exports that's going to happen. It's starting to happen right now. Denmark and Germany are the two big footholds or setting up offices in to establish those joint ventures. But if we can expand that, and like obviously geopolitics plays a big role of where you choose to do that. If we can do that with them in the United States, I think it's going to be incredible. I also think it's going to be a lot harder than it sounds.
I guess I'm thinking that we could share some of that now, like they could share it our way, but they just don't have the capacity to export anything out. Like everything's going to the front lines in Ukraine
Well, it's
today.
actually restricted by law that it's
Huh.
illegal to export anything drone related out of Ukraine. So it's to do that to make sure that their industrial base is focused on fighting the war, right? The problem is that, and if you talk with some of the guys in the Ukrainian industrial base, they'll say we have so much extra capacity. We have hundreds and hundreds of companies with thousands and thousands of products. We don't even have enough people to use them in Ukraine. And so part of it's been going back and forth, but part of the rationality of opening this up was to get more economic support going into Ukraine to help support the war effort in different ways besides just drones. If you could sell drones to get money to then buy food or other things that you need that maybe aren't organic to Ukraine, then that's a way to do this. Like I said, it's happening now. It's probably a year late to need, but it is what it is now.
Total softball question, Mike, but just I'm sure you ask this daily. What the hell is the future of manned aviation? right? Like we just saw the hit on Maduro. We got, like very conventional, it looked like, although incredibly well planned and executed. You've got operations in Syria still, which I'm sure are using drones to some degree. But what do you like when some kid comes up and they're like, "Hey, you were an F-15 pilot. I want to do that." Like, what are you telling them now?
I was a backseater, which is even worse. Like, aren't you going to be replaced by a like R2D2? Yeah, like I've seen the movie, right? Like he literally flies in the back seat. You know. uh, I'd say it's and, right? The future is a lot of and in it. Anytime you speak in absolutes or things that are binary, like either ors, like those, that never really plays out, right? Like it's not, the evolution doesn't happen that way. It happens in these small incremental changes. I was my last job before coming to this drone startup. I worked with AI and autonomy, putting that on unmanned things and that was a common thing, which is how is this going to replace my job? It's like it's not. It's going to help you do your job better. Right? Like how do you get mass without building $100 million fighter jets? Like can I take $100 million and buy 5 unmanned things and have them be controlled by the one human? So I do need the $100 million fighter jets, but I didn't buy enough of them and I can't afford all of them. And so how can I change that cost equation where I have the same amount of money, can I actually field more mass that's more affordable? Affordable mass is the term that kind of gets thrown out. But the more important part of that is that synergy of the man machine teaming. And it's part of the conversation that kind of gets lost because we instantly go to this like binary thing, whether it's like, machines are never going to have a role. Like, oh, they absolutely do and are and will. Have you ever, we might have talked about this before. I can't remember. You know who Gary Kasparov is? He's a grandmaster chess player from the 90s. His claim to fame was IBM's Deep Blue. So
Yeah.
he played against the supercomputer and he beat it in 1996. But no one really remembers that. They remember the next year when he lost to it. So that set him on this, and it's an important story. I know we got to get off track talking about chess, but it's important because that set him, Gary Kasparov, that set him on this path where he thought, what if that machine was my teammate? And so he invented this thing called advanced chess, which it's a type of chess where each human also has access to a computer chess engine. And they use that to explore the range of possibilities. So it's the human and the machine. So the human intuition, instinct, strategy, and the machine is gunculating possible outcomes and choices that you could make. But the ultimate choice, that decision authority retains with the human, right? And when you think about war as an extension of politics in some aspects, right? There's some quotes about that. But ultimately it's a human endeavor, right? And so there's a human calculus and a human element of warfare. It's a very, very human thing. And so to say that like we're going to have these like Terminator machines just like fighting wars without humans, I don't see it. I mean, it plays good for a movie, obviously,
Yeah.
but yeah.
I often say something similar. And I remember even like going through flight school in '03, '04, whenever it was. We'd come out of Kosovo and there's some drone use, and people would talk about like, yeah, drones are going to be around and then you guys won't be flying. I think we're a ways off, but now that you see some of the capabilities, I'm just trying to imagine, and obviously I'm a rotary wing guy, like slow as hell moving around up there. So slow. Like, how do you protect an asset like that that's moving with humans on board if you got to put people in? It's just frightening how you could get enough mass to protect land, get out.
I think the part where the human really rises to the occasion is when you get into complexities. So and it's not like who can play the best game. It's like know when you need to break the rules of the game, right? If you have something that was so hardwired, and here's the example I'll give. And Ryan, I know you'll appreciate this. If you go back and you look at, just grab 20 or 30 citations of something like a Silver Star, Navy Cross, Medal of Honor, Army Cross, right? Or Distinguished Service Cross, I should
Yeah,
say.
I
When
got
you go and read those citations, they're all of that human ingenuity rising to the occasion, and they did something that was so far above and beyond the framework and the construct of anyone else would have done in that situation. And then they made something amazing happen, right?
True. Yeah.
So every time I think about man versus machine, I don't think a machine you couldn't program as we understand today. You could not program the intelligence to a machine to know when to break the rules. You will put deterministic bounds and conditions on things like that, and it's like moral, legal, ethical implications as well, right? But a
Totally.
human, what's between our ears right now is still the best computer on earth.
And taking danger close shots. Like, it's great.
Yeah. I remember,
Scary.
I was just telling someone the other day about that. I did employed on some strafe, like really, really close strafe passes without clearance or anything, and got back and got in trouble for it. I was like, well, I read the 9 line back to him because they were under fire. And it was a little bit little disjointed, and it's like, yeah, we got what we need. We can do this. I'm completely safe and effective. We can do this. And we didn't even strafe to hit anything. We actually aimed to miss on purpose. Like they were pinned down, and instead of trying to find out which building these guys were shooting at,
Yeah.
like let's just lay a big string of bullets right down the middle. And then, the bad guys are going to break contact as they go, what was that? The blue guys are going to use that 5 or 10 seconds that they have to go get to a better position and to break contact, withdraw. All worked out, and come back and then get in trouble for doing something that's like, well, you're not supposed to do that. Like, yeah, but it was the right thing in the situation. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Imagine calling up if you're on the ground to get initials of a machine, whatever it
yeah,
is, like,
yeah,
all right. Anyway,
yeah.
I got two questions for you. Pick either one you want. One is what's keeping you up at night in this domain of all these things we're talking about? Or is there some kind of tech out there now that is just so sexy, revolutionary that you feel isn't getting talked about enough that you might see because you're so deep in it?
Well, I'm a CEO of a drone startup, so that keeps me up at night. The thing that we're actually focused on is affordable mass. Go figure, right? So I've jumped full, into the deep end. And I think now's the time to do it. And I think we need the right people at the conversation. And so I wanted to. I didn't want to be on the sidelines. I wanted to be in the action, trying to make this happen because I truly believe that the nation needs it. We need to do something, and it needs to be meaningful in the next 12 months. So that's what keeps me up at night. Is we need big commitments, a lot of things that are cheap, fast, and good enough, and which is not generally the American way of war.
Yeah.
It's usually gold-plated solutions, and then throw a bajillion dollars a piece at them, and then you'll get them in a few years. We have to double down into quantity. We have to get to the quantity, and for those that have lived in some of the services, you guys know this, but for those who don't, you think of like the American military as this big like superpower coming through. Not really anymore. We're not as big as you think we are. The technical advantages that we've held for a long time, those we have advantages, but in a lot of areas, but those gaps are closing. I used to say by every couple of years, but it's kind of like every couple of months. And so we can't just live in this world where we think that we're the best ever. The midnight hammer strikes that went on in Iran. We as a nation put everything we could to do that mission once. If they said, "Hey, can you guys do it again next week?" Sorry, that was it.
Jeez. Is
That's
that
all we
right,
have.
Mike?
That's it. That's all we
From what
have.
standpoint? The munitions, the airframes? Like, what was the limiting factor on that?
The munitions, we don't have enough munitions to do that again. But the amount of coordination for tankers, I mean, it's incredible the amount of aircraft involved to make that mission happen. And there's a whole bunch of details we won't talk about that are like, well, thank God it worked, right? But like, there was some consecutive miracles, a lot of really, really, really fine Americans that were working on that problem and staring at it for a very long time. That's how it was successful. It was the people that have been looking at that for 10, 15 years every single day. That was their job every day. That's why it was successful. We just happen to have all the equipment too. But if you wanted to pull that all back together, it's going to be really, really hard.
Interesting.
Venezuela, we pulled out some tricks to make that happen, right? Could we do it again? Maybe. I mean, it helped a whole lot that we basically put an armada off the coast and we staged out of Puerto Rico, which is due north of Venezuela. And can we do that in China for like in the Pacific? Probably not. I think everyone would see the writing on the wall that we're amassing forces, right? So you can use like geopolitical tensions as an auspice to preposition your forces for something, but there's an element of surprise. Like that's pretty big telegraph. If they really wanted to do something about it, they could have.
Yeah. We're back, right? I mean, we're off the coast of Iran now. We got
Yeah,
the Armada is in position. So who knows?
Iran's an interesting thing.
Again, anything really cool that you're looking at, like, damn, this is next gen. I'm surprised. Or even next gen for like China or Russia, that you're probably more China, that's coming out, that's concerning.
Yeah, I think the physics is a thing, so we'll say that. And the things that I guess excite me the most right now are those areas where we haven't really done a whole lot in a long time. So propulsion is one of them, like so engines, turbine engines in particular. Man, we haven't had a new turbine engine come out and fly in generations, like generations. Even like the F-35 engines, like the newest fighter we have, like that engine came. It's basically an adaptation of the F-22 engine, and that F-22 engine was an adaptation core from something else, right? It's like the engine technology we have and fly with is like pretty much from the 1970s. It's just been like put a little bit of this, put a little bit of that, but fundamentally things like are called three-stream engines or variable bypass engines, where you have a third stream and you can actually it's almost like a variable cam technology in a car, but do it for a turbine engine. And so you could put the engine in a mode where you can fly 30% further, or you can put it in a mode and get 30% more power. You just don't have it all. You can kind of go back and forth between the attributes. I think those there's a couple of programs in the U.S. It's going to be in the F-47 eventually, if they don't kill the engine part of the program.
Mm,
China's working on some stuff, but I think when you figure that out, and these are big engines, they haven't figured out how to make them small yet. So these are, the F-35 is the biggest turbine engine in a fighter in the world, and it's not small enough to fit into that yet. So there's uh there's there's work to be done, but I think the propulsion of how you get things going is one of them. And part of that propulsion, I think, rocket motors. There's a lot of really cool things happening in rocket motors, all rocket motors in particular, but there's some liquid ones. And when you get into 3D printing some of the energetics, and you can 3D print it in these crystallized patterns that when you shoot a missile. Imagine if someone came up to you one day and just took the rocket motor off of your missile that's on your helicopter and put a different one on, and now it went 50% further. And you go, wow,
crazy.
that's crazy. Like all he did is change the way the energetic stockpile was. Like, yeah. So there's some really cool stuff in propulsion and energetics that I think is it's going to surprise people when it starts actually hitting the fleet, because it's really hard to tell just from looking at it. But when it starts working and getting used, it'll reach out and touch you.
Damn. And then you were saying that it sounds like from the US standpoint, defense procurement is evolving appropriately here, right? Like longer horizon demand signals. Is there anything else you'd be asking the administration or USG to do that would kind of set us up for more success in the next year or two, the way you were describing, like anything with export controls, supply chain?
I think the biggest thing is follow through. So one of the things that you'll see is it's kind of like the Warren playbook in DC. There'll be a press release, maybe a speech, and the speech has talking points. And then there's a memo that comes out to like implement what was the speech and the talking points, and that's a draft. And then by the final draft memo, and then the final memo, then the implementation. It's been so watered down. If you would just like
Yeah.
do what you said you were going to do, there's a say-do gap between the narrative and the execution. And so, and those on the inside kind of know that they're like, yeah, I know what you said, but what you really meant was not that, right? So
Yeah.
there's this, I want to call it the frozen middle, but there's definitely a say-do gap between narratives and the people who actually have to do the job and are impacted personally and professionally day in and day out by some of these policy implementations. Now, if you go to Congress and you ask Congress, like, hey, can you help us to do this? And Congress will tell you pretty much like, we've given you so much authority. Pentagon, use it. And then you go to the Pentagon and go, yeah, I can't because I have this, the Congress won't let me. And so there's this a little bit of like, mom versus dad type thing. But if you have the legal authority to do something and it just becomes a policy blocking, there's a lot of risk aversion that I think this year is starting to change. We really need 12 months to figure out what's good and what's not. And so if you change too many things at once, it's going to be hard to tell.
I was going to ask you about NATO. I'm sure you've flown a ton with NATO
Oh
allies.
yeah.
Defense spending is up pretty significantly over the past 2 years, not by coincidence, right? There's a lot of obviously foreign policy and geopolitics at play. They've got incursions coming over from Belarus,
Yeah.
Russia, different airframes that they see periodically, drones, balloons, whatnot. Any thoughts about what's going on there? Are you kind of glad to see this defense spending increase? Do you see them trying to catch up, like parity wise with us? Is there an opportunity there? Any thoughts when it comes to NATO?
Yeah, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but before the Russian invasion in 2022 in Ukraine, there was, I think, 3 or 4 countries that were above the 3% GDP, like, limit. Now it's, like, over half. I think Poland's imagine this, the further east you are in NATO, the higher your defense spending went up. So Poland, I think, is leading the pack at, like, 5 or 5.5% right now, because they're the closest to the problem. I think that's great to see. One of the things I was not so great to see, and again, I don't have the information here in front of me. But they came out with this 5% or new kind of NATO target, but
That's right.
it had some fine print in there, if I remember right. So one of it was like direct GDP, like correlation, and there was this indirect, which gave, I think, a lot of financial engineering doors that open for people to start
To the
counting things.
accountants. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So like, hey, it's 5%. I was like, is it really? Like, show me where these things are. So I think there's some, and it probably by on purpose. Everything's a negotiation. So I'm glad to see that there is an effort to increase the defense spending. I'm also glad to see that that spending is not just give money to buy US equipment. It is we're going to commit to building these capabilities in our own countries that are indigenous, because that is also part of our national security strategy. I see NATO, but really a lot of countries right now, whether it's in the Pacific, whether it's in the Middle East. India is a great example. Most of it had these sovereign strategies to onshore and reshore and build these industrial capacities to do business internationally. And they see that as a necessity for national security. And so they're not just writing checks out and buying other people's equipment, because what if one day the US decides not to sell them that equipment, which guess what's happening, right? So people are like, well, I guess I'm just going to remove that risk and just put that money in my own economy and figure it out. So I think there's some good opportunities there. It'll be really interesting to see which NATO partners align and partner on certain things. Everyone, if everyone tries to build wrong analogy, but if everyone tries to build a fighter jet, it's like, great, who's going to build the tankers? Who's going to build the mobility air force? Like,
Yeah.
what can we just like decide to break this thing up and collaborate? So I think that's going to be interesting to see play out. I see things like GCAP right now, the 6th gen program, that's Italy and Britain, and there's this huge kerfuffle. The whole program might fall apart because they can't agree on sharing
What
secrets.
is GCAP, Mike?
That is what is it called?
Is it like
General.
a fighter that they're
Yeah,
building?
it's a 24 timeframe 6th gen fighter program. Something aerial program. Yeah. So anyways, yeah, there is big kerfuffle about sharing the work and sharing secrets. So, the alliance is strong, but it also means you need to share information. But anyways, back to what you said before about the GDP part of it. Each country wants some sovereign capability that gives them that risk mitigation factor, right? So like partners and allies are a huge part of, obviously, not just NATO, but the US. Our long-term enduring competitive advantage is our partners and allies. Like that is our superpower. If we don't have them, it becomes a lot harder to do what we want to do.
Anything we missed that you would point people to just in this space that's coming that you're excited about? And if not, we could just jump to how they find you in the newsletter.
Yeah, you can check out my startup, Purple Rhombus. It's at purple-rhombus.com. It's got drones on it flying around doing stuff. We build a lot of them, and they're really cheap.
What kind of drones are they, Mike? Can you give us the rundown? Like, what are
Yeah,
you?
they're like Group 2, Group 3. So think of like 8-foot wingspan. I think about flying mailbox. It's going to carry a payload, 100 miles or so.
We'll check it out. And then the Merge newsletter, they can find. What's the best way to find that?
Yeah, go to the website, themerge.co. That's CO. It's not com. I could not afford the com domain. So there is no M, themerge.co. Just dump your email right on the homepage. If you want to browse and see what the goods are, the archive is right there. Just scroll down, click through a few of them. I think as soon as I push it out, it gets uploaded. So it's all free. And yeah, if you want to check out the pod, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, just to look for the Merge. It's up there somewhere. And then lastly, we have most of our social media follows us on LinkedIn, because that's where national security conversations happen, which sounds weird when you say that out loud, but it really happens on LinkedIn.
Thanks so much, Mike. This is a blast, man. Thank you for coming back on with us.
Hey, thanks, Ryan. I'm glad to be here.
Thanks for listening and being a part of the RH community. Would you like to receive the same daily intel brief that Glenn and I read? You can get it at restrictedhandling.com. We've curated what we consider to be the most relevant and reputable sources on all things international security, geopolitics, military and intel ops, and economics and sanctions, focused exclusively on Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and the Middle East, to include accompanying podcasts for Russia, China, economics, and spy stories. Just head to restrictedhandling.com, enter your email, and you'll get the daily briefs that Glenn and I both read, and you can leave comments and questions that we can respond to. Thanks again for listening. Stay safe.